The stars had forgotten us. Centuries had passed since humanity's last transmission, and the galaxy assumed we were extinct. Once, Earth had burned under its own wars, its own greed, and the other species of the cosmos watched with distant pity. They never bothered to check for survivors. They never searched for remnants. They moved on. And so, the universe flourished without us. The Vul Imperium colonized the Outer Rim, turning barren rocks into fortress worlds. The Zeltar Dominion expanded their bioorganic megacities across entire planets, their towering hive spires pulsing with unnatural life. The Syndicate of Aeon claimed the richest systems, turning them into trade hubs of unimaginable wealth. None of them cared about humanity's empty grave. Until we returned. The first sign was a whisper in the void. A deep space listening post on the fringe of the Imperium picked up a signal, one they hadn't heard in ages. It was ancient, crackling with distortion, but unmistakably human. The message was simple. We are coming. At first, they thought it was a prank, some rogue transmission from a long-dead satellite. But then the colony on Corin Prime lost contact. A week later, 3 border stations went dark. Entire fleets scrambled, their admirals demanding answers. Yet all they found were empty husks of warships, floating in the void, their crews missing, their data wiped clean. Panic spread. Then came the invasion. We didn't arrive with diplomacy. We didn't negotiate. Humanity had been forgotten, discarded like a failed species. But in the darkness, we had survived. No longer the weak, divided people we once were. The fires of our past had forged something new, something stronger. We had learned. We had evolved. And now, we had returned. The Vul Imperium was the first to feel our wrath. They had colonized the remnants of our old territories, settling their people on planets that once belonged to us. They built massive fortresses, confident in their dominion, certain that humanity was nothing more than a historical footnote. But they had made a fatal mistake. Corin Prime was their pride, a heavily defended world, home to millions of Vul citizens and a fleet stationed in orbit. It had never fallen to an enemy attack in over 300 years. Their generals believed it was impenetrable until the humans arrived. They came without warning, without diplomacy. The Imperium's orbital scanners detected dozens, no hundreds, of unidentified vessels emerging from the void. At first they thought it was debris, maybe a malfunction in their systems. Then the alarms screamed as the ships powered their weapons. The Vul defense fleet scrambled. Battlecruisers and destroyers took formation, their captains confident in their overwhelming firepower. They had faced rebellions before. They had fought the Zeltar in border skirmishes. This was nothing new. They were wrong. The first human strike was merciless. Kinetic rounds moving at near relativistic speeds tore through shields like paper. The Imperium's defensive stations exploded before they could even fire back. Vul commanders shouted frantic orders, their fleet trying to reorganize, but the humans fought like ghosts, appearing, striking, and vanishing. Their ships were unlike anything the Imperium had ever encountered. Sleek, black, angular vessels, void, dark, and silent. Their hulls didn't reflect light. Their engines barely registered on scanners. Every weapon was precise. Every strike was devastating. The battle lasted less than an hour. By the time it was over, the once mighty fleet of Corin Prime was nothing more than twisted wreckage drifting in space. Then, the bombardment began. The Vul citizens below had no chance. They ran to bunkers, called for reinforcements, pleaded for mercy. But mercy was not in humanity's nature anymore. Not after what had been done to us. The skies rained fire as orbital weapons turned cities to dust. Towers crumbled, streets melted. The world that had stood for centuries as a beacon of Vul dominance fell in a single night. Then, the humans broadcasted their second message. This was our world. Now it is yours no longer. And just like that, Corin Prime belonged to humanity once more. The fall of Corin Prime sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The Vul Imperium, once so sure of its dominance, scrambled to understand the enemy they had dismissed as long dead. Intelligence reports poured in, but they made no sense. The humans' technology was beyond anything recorded. Their weapons ignored conventional shielding. Their ships moved like phantoms. They didn't fight for conquest. They fought for revenge. And they were just getting started. The next blow came swiftly. The Zeltar Dominion had turned Earth itself into one of their bio-worlds, a grotesque fusion of living organisms and alien architecture. They had grown their cities into the bones of our dead home. Its atmosphere had been altered, its lands reshaped. Humanity was never meant to return. But we did. The attack was brutal. There were no warnings, no declarations. The Zeltar woke to destruction. The sky tore open as massive human warships descended, black against the diseased green glow of their living cities. The first strike was surgical. A pulse wave bomb detonated in high orbit, unleashing an electromagnetic storm that fried every Zeltar bionode across the planet. Their organic towers, which pulsed with the thoughts of 1 billion minds, went silent. Their defenses, living weapons bred to react faster than thought, rotted in an instant. Then the real horror began. The humans didn't just bomb the planet, they cleansed it. They deployed weapons the Zeltar had never seen before, self-replicating nanites that spread like wildfire, dissolving every trace of alien contamination. Entire cities collapsed as the living structures withered and crumbled to dust. The Zeltar screamed in their hive mind. They begged. They tried to retreat. But there was nowhere to run. Human strike teams dropped from the sky, clad in exoskeletal armor, moving like wraiths through the chaos. They hunted the survivors, one by one. Zeltar nobles, their bodies bloated with centuries of genetic perfection, were dragged from their palaces and executed. The streets ran thick with alien ichor, and then, when it was over, the last transmission came. A single human stood before the ruins of what had once been the Zeltar capital, his voice cold and resolute. "This was our home. You defiled it. You will pay." With those words, Earth was ours again. But the war was far from over. The galaxy trembled. 2 great powers had already fallen to humanity's wrath. The Vul Imperium had lost Corin Prime, and the Zeltar Dominion had been eradicated from Earth. Whispers spread across the stars. Fearful voices speaking of ghosts returned from the abyss. The lost species had returned. And they were angry. The Syndicate of Aeon, the richest and most powerful trade empire in the galaxy, gathered its war council in a hidden station orbiting a gas giant. Their fleets were vast, their mercenary legions endless. Unlike the Imperium and the Dominion, the Syndicate wasn't just powerful. It was intelligent. They knew brute force wouldn't stop humanity. So they tried to bargain. A Syndicate envoy, one of the most influential beings in the galaxy, sent a transmission on every known human frequency. The message was carefully crafted, designed to soothe, to manipulate. "Humanity, we acknowledge your claim, we acknowledge your vengeance, but war is costly. Let us talk. We can offer wealth beyond measure, alliances that would make you untouchable. There is no need for further bloodshed." For 3 days, there was no response. Then, on the 4th day, a single message arrived. "We do not bargain with thieves." The Syndicate barely had time to react before their hidden station ceased to exist. A human dreadnought, a vessel of impossible design, pierced the void like a blade. It fired once, a weapon unlike anything ever seen before. The space around the station warped, cracked, and then reality itself collapsed. The station was gone, not destroyed, erased. Panic spread like wildfire. Syndicate leaders scattered, hiding in their strongest fortresses, surrounding themselves with their best defenses. It didn't matter. Humanity found them. One by one, Syndicate worlds fell, not through invasion, but through precision. Supply lines were cut without a single human ship being detected. Entire cargo fleets vanished into the void, their crews never heard from again. Syndicate warlords awoke to find their personal guards missing, their security systems unresponsive. And then, the final blow came. The Syndicate's homeworld, Aegis Prime, was untouchable. A fortress planet, surrounded by defensive fleets and automated battle stations. It had never been breached. Until now. The defenders never saw the attack coming. Not from space, not from orbit. It came from inside. The humans had already been there. Syndicate leaders, once confident in their safety, awoke to find their fortresses compromised, their systems turned against them. Entire districts descended into chaos as their own security drones turned their weapons inward. Then, the sky burned. High above, human warships unleashed hell. Energy lances, kinetic rods, precision strike missiles targeted only the ruling elite. The rest of the planet was left untouched, except for those responsible for humanity's downfall. Within hours, Aegis Prime was leaderless. The Syndicate of Aeon, the wealthiest empire in the known universe, was decapitated in a single night. And then, the final transmission was sent. This is not a war. This is justice. The galaxy finally understood. Humanity wasn't here to conquer. They weren't here for power. They were here to take back what was stolen. And they were just getting started. The Syndicate of Aeon had fallen. Its warlords were dead, its fleets shattered, its fortresses abandoned. Across the galaxy, governments and empires watched in horror as humanity carved a path of vengeance through those who had once mocked their extinction. And now, only one force remained. The Galactic conquered. The so-called peacekeepers of the galaxy. The self-appointed rulers who had stood by and watched as the Imperium, the Dominion, and the Syndicate divided the spoils of humanity's ruin. They had done nothing. Worse, they had sanctioned it. It was the conquered that had declared humanity a failed species, that had ratified the treaties allowing others to claim our worlds, to rewrite history as if we had never existed. For centuries, they sat in their ivory towers, untouched, believing they were above consequence. They were wrong. The humans did not strike immediately. They waited. They let the fear settle. Let the conquered realize what was coming. For the first time in history, the Galactic conquered called for unity. Former enemies gathered. Vul, Zeltar survivors, Syndicate remnants. Entire fleets, the greatest armada ever assembled, stood ready at the conquered's capital world, Eidolon. Every weapon, every defense, every fleet stood waiting for the final battle. And then, humanity arrived. But not as they expected. There was no massive invasion force, no overwhelming fleet. Instead, they sent one ship, a single black warship, sleek and silent, emerging from the void like a phantom. It drifted toward Eidolon's orbit, undeterred by the armada facing it. The conquered hailed them, demanding answers. The reply was a single message, broadcast across every channel, in every language. "We remember." Then the ship vanished. The conquered barely had time to react before their fleets began to die. Not in battle, not from weapons. From inside, ships lost power. Their systems turned against them. Crew members fell, choking, gasping, as something unseen moved through their ships. Soldiers opened fire at nothing, screaming of shadows that shouldn't exist. Admirals sent distress signals, begging for aid. No one answered, because humanity was already inside. The conquered had spent centuries believing themselves untouchable. But they had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy that had adapted. An enemy that had waited. By the time the first explosions rocked Eidolon's surface, it was already over. The humans had won before the battle even began. Cities burned. Towers collapsed. The seat of galactic power crumbled beneath the weight of its own sins. The last of the conquered's rulers, their proud, high chancellor, stood in the ruins of the Senate Hall, watching the sky rain fire. And then, the final message came. Not from a ship, not from an army, from every screen, every transmission, a simple, undeniable truth. Humanity has returned. The galaxy would never forget again. The galaxy had been rewritten. The Imperium, the Dominion, the Syndicate, and the Conquered all had fallen. What once stood as the pillars of civilization now lay in ruins, their remnants scattered, their leaders either dead or in hiding. And humanity stood at the center of it all. But this was not conquest. It was not expansion. Humanity did not claim the throne of the galaxy. They didn't need to. The message had been made clear. We are not gone. We were never gone. Across the stars, whispers turned into myths. Myths turned into truth. The return of humanity had become legend. Entire species spoke of the silent war, of an enemy that fought like ghosts, that appeared and vanished without a trace, of a vengeance so absolute, no empire had been able to stop it. But there were those who still did not understand. The survivors of the fallen powers plotted in the dark. The last remnants of the conquered, the exiled warlords of the Syndicate, the shattered fleets of the Imperium. They gathered in secret, desperate to reclaim what had been lost. They thought humanity was finished, that they had taken their revenge and would fade back into the void. They were wrong, because humanity wasn't finished. Not yet. The last battle took place in the ruins of an old human colony. A world stolen long ago, now a graveyard of metal and stone. It had been abandoned for centuries, a wasteland of rusted skyscrapers and forgotten war machines. It was here that the remnants of the old Galactic Order made their final stand. They had gathered what was left of their fleets. Old warships, scavenged technology, desperate soldiers with nothing left to lose. They called themselves the Last Light, believing they were the final hope for the galaxy. They prepared for war. They fortified the planet. They set their defenses, waiting for the inevitable. Then, one night, their systems went dark. The sky above them was empty. No ships, no movement, nothing. And that was when the screaming began. The Last Light's soldiers, seasoned veterans of 100 battles, began to disappear. Guards found their patrols missing, weapons malfunctioned, communications collapsed. The enemy was nowhere, because humanity was already there. They didn't come from the sky. They came from the shadows, from the ruins, from the dust of a world that had once been theirs. One by one, the Last Light fell. Their leaders dragged from their bunkers. Their soldiers hunted in the dark. No fleet arrived to save them. No reinforcements came to answer their cries. By dawn, the war was over. The last of the old order was erased. And in the silence of the ruined world, a final message was left behind. Carved into the steel walls of the last fortress, written in a language older than the empires that had ruled the stars. Never again. And with that, humanity was gone. They did not stay. They did not rule. They vanished back into the void, into the silence of the cosmos. But the galaxy would never forget. Because the next time humanity returned, it would not be for vengeance. It would be for something far worse. The stars would remember. They would always remember. Humanity had returned. And this time, they would never be forgotten again. The stars remembered. Decades passed since humanity's return, and though they had vanished once more into the void, the fear remained. The galaxy, once so arrogant, now spoke of humanity in hushed whispers. Worlds that once belonged to them remained untouched, not claimed, not repopulated, left to rot for fear of what might happen should anyone dare trespass again. The species that had once ruled from their golden towers now lived in the shadow of a ghost. And then the messages began. Silent signals, buried deep in forgotten channels. Transmissions encoded with technology no one understood. At first, the other races dismissed them as echoes, remnants of old human broadcasts, lingering in the void. But then the disappearances started. It wasn't like before. It wasn't war. No fleets destroyed, no cities burned, just people, vanishing, scientists, engineers, scholars. The best minds of every species, taken without a trace. The Syndicate remnants were the first to take notice, because their most powerful CEOs, their most influential minds, began vanishing overnight. Their security networks detected nothing. Their guards saw nothing. One moment they were there, the next, they were gone. The Vul Imperium lost an entire research station, its entire staff of elite scientists simply erased from existence. The Zel-Tar, those few who had survived their empire's fall, found their last genetic archives empty. Every last drop of their precious research into bioevolution stolen. The Conquered's old archives, now fractured and scattered across neutral worlds, were wiped clean. Every piece of knowledge they had ever stolen, every advancement, every technological breakthrough that had given them power over the galaxy. Gone. The message came soon after. Not a declaration. Not a demand. A simple warning. You stole from us. Now we take back what is ours. The galaxy realized too late. Humanity had never left. They had been watching, learning, adapting. And now they weren't coming back for revenge. They were coming back for something far worse, for control. The galaxy stood on the precipice of something far greater than war. The return of humanity had been a lesson in fear. Their vengeance had burned through the old order, left empires in ruins, and rewritten the balance of power. But even in their absence, the scars remained. Now something new was happening. This was not the cold, merciless destruction that had erased the Syndicate. This was not the precise, tactical annihilation that had dismantled the Galactic Conquered. This was infiltration. Entire sectors fell silent overnight. Space stations, research facilities, military outposts, all went dark without a single shot fired. At first, the galaxy refused to believe it was happening, because the alternative was too terrifying. Humanity wasn't just attacking anymore. They were taking. The first proof came from the ruins of Aegis Prime, the former Syndicate capital. A scavenger fleet had landed, desperate for anything of value from the once mighty trade empire. They found nothing. Not just destroyed buildings, not just crumbling infrastructure. Nothing. No bodies. No remains. No sign that life had ever existed there at all. It was as if the entire civilization had been erased, down to its very foundations. And then, the ships vanished too. The scavengers tried to leave, but their vessels, fully fueled, fully operational, would not respond. Their communications went silent. Their distress signals were never heard. They were simply gone. The only thing that remained was a final transmission sent on every known frequency in the galaxy. A single voice, calm, measured, unfamiliar, but unmistakably human. You took what was ours. We are taking it back. The Zel-Tar were next. The few that remained of their once great empire had hidden well. Deep space colonies, genetically enhanced soldiers, bioorganic fortresses designed to be impenetrable. It didn't matter. One by one, their strongholds ceased to exist. No battles, no warning, just silence. A Zeltar commander, desperate for answers, ordered one of his ships to flee, to leave the galaxy entirely and find refuge in deep space. It made it exactly 1 light-year before the crew stopped responding. When another fleet arrived to investigate, they found the ship perfectly intact. The systems still worked, the life support was active, the lights were on, but the crew was gone. Every single one of them. And in the captain's chair, a message was carved into the metal. Not even the void will hide you. The Vul Imperium held out longer than the others. Their fleets had been rebuilt, their defenses reinforced, their leadership centralized. But they had always fought wars they could see. They had never fought an enemy that moved in silence. And when the first human dreadnought appeared above their capital, they realized too late. This wasn't just war. This was the future. Humanity had not returned for revenge. They had moved beyond it. The old species of the galaxy had outlived their usefulness. And now, humanity was taking everything. Technology, knowledge, resources, worlds. And soon, there would be nothing left. Except them, and the new order they would create. The last remnants of the old galaxy fought to understand. For centuries, they had ruled. For centuries, they had stood as the architects of civilization. They had stolen, they had conquered, they had rewritten history in their own image. Now they were nothing. And they didn't even know how it had happened. There had been no great invasion, no grand fleet-to-fleet battle where humanity staked its claim on the stars. Instead, their presence was a whisper in the void. A creeping inevitability that could not be stopped. Entire species, entire cultures simply disappeared. Not just from planets, from records, from history. Once mighty empires had no proof they had ever existed. Galactic archives, once filled with knowledge spanning thousands of years, were altered, their most sacred documents now missing, their greatest achievements, their proudest moments, erased. It was as if humanity wasn't just reclaiming power. They were rewriting reality itself. A desperate coalition formed in the last untouched sectors of space. The survivors of the old order, those few who had evaded humanity's silent purge, gathered on an uncharted world at the very edge of the known galaxy. Here, the last free minds of the universe, the greatest scientists, strategists, and leaders, sought to answer the one question that haunted them all. What had humanity become? They pored over every fragment of data, every intercepted message, every corrupted archive. It was all wrong. Nothing made sense. The weapons humanity now wielded were not the weapons they had used before. The tactics, the technology, none of it should have been possible. And then, they found it. Buried deep in a forgotten syndicate data vault, hidden beneath layers of encryption, was a single name. The last survivors never had a chance to act. Before they could escape, before they could warn the galaxy, their systems flickered. Their ships failed. The sky above them darkened, not with warships, but with something else, something invisible, something inevitable. And in the final moments, as the universe as they knew it ceased to be, they heard the last message, a whisper in their minds, cold, calculated, and absolute. You are obsolete. The old galaxy was gone. The era of flesh and empire had ended, and in its place, humanity stood alone, silent, eternal, infinite.